Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, last week I painted something on Friday just for me, and I thought turning Fridays into kind of a personal hobby day would be a fun idea, where each week I just painted something because I thought it was neat and I wanted to. And so that's led to this fella here. This is Caradon from the Overdrive game box from Mantic Games. Now, they very kindly sent me along a copy of Overdrive to check out, and the game itself looks really interesting. It's an arena fighter where you draft opposing teams of players, and the concept is, imagine, if you will, there were big guys from a Blood Bowl team, and the game progressed beyond them. And suddenly all of these retired players needed something to do, so they ended up being like a halftime show for, what they used to be doing. But viewers loved the halftime show more, and it eventually became its own thing. That's the idea behind Overdrive, that it's these big chunky monster guys clobbering one another, and it's cool. It's just kitschy fun. I really like the design on these. And any game that has a shark in a robot suit, you gotta love him. Or is he a mutant? Who knows? I don't know. He hasn't got a tail. Maybe he's a mutant. It doesn't matter. At any rate, he was a lot of fun to paint, so this was my choice for this week. All of the paints will be listed in the description below, and for those of you who like watching me correct mistakes, there are going to be one or two moments in this video where I think you'll find, okay, I am mortal too. So, without any further mucking around, let's get started. So when you first pull miniatures out of the box, this is what you're going to have, and I've got to admit, I'm actually a little surprised by how nice these look. One way or the other though, it's actually a really nice gaming piece. There's only a couple of little scar marks where it's been taken off of a frame, but as is typical for most of the Mantic stuff I've come across so far, they've done it in such a way that it is away from the detail, so we can trim that down and file it off. So I don't see a reason why you couldn't just spray this guy one color and put him on because they're gaming pieces. But I do want to go further. So what I'm going to do is grab my knife and my files, just smooth these out a little bit, and then we'll prime this guy for painting. Now, in order to prime him, I've started with a spray of Barbarian Flesh from the Army Painter. And if there's anything you take away from today, it's that if you're going to be painting orange, start from a peachy skin tone and you're going to have a much easier time. Same way as, inexplicably, painting yellow over pink is really easy. Same too, we're going to have here a much faster time of painting. Now, as for the base, you can leave him off. This is actually a transparent plastic base, but I suspect that's mostly because it's a little easier to get these trimmed and cut to the right shape. All of the play guides and how-to videos I've seen from Mantic, they have these bases painted. So I'm going to paint mine. If you do want to leave it clear, then of course, you'll just have to fix this fella to something else while you're painting him. But that's much of a much. For now, I'm going to do it their way. So rather than leaving him looking like the inside of a chicken nugget, let's get some Fire Dragon Bright. And ordinarily I'd suggest you want to thin this down a little, but with Fire Dragon Bright, it's so light, it's not going to make much of a difference. We are going to have to do 2 coats at least, maybe even 3, but you'll see how much easier this goes on. Like, that is already orange. And that is so orange. Like, this is going to be way brighter than it looks on camera. It's ludicrous. But as you can see, it goes on really well. And I am not at all concerned about areas like his skin or the undersuit. The orange is going to be the star of the show, so it's most important that the orange is a nice solid color. So don't worry about hitting anything else. Oh, that's bright. Anyhow, I'm going to do this first coat, let this dry thoroughly, and then we'll come back and give it a second. Now, I do suggest something with a wedge tip is going to be your best choice for base coating this dude, because you've got lots of little nooks and crannies that you really want to work this into. So, yeah, grab something that'll help you do that. Now that's orange. That is really orange. What we're going to move on to is Rack White, which is a dry paint. You could just as easily use Praxetti White. It's not going to matter a huge amount, but Rack White has a tiny, tiny sort of peachy tone to it, which is going to help with our orange. Now, I've scrubbed off most of this into a dry brush here, and what I'm going to do is just flick along the edges of his face first, so that I get a vision of what I'm going to leave behind on the orange, and we're going to paint his face a different color anyway. So that's, yeah, pretty perfect. What I'm going to do now is just start hitting the edges of orange detail that I want to look a little sharp. So I'm not worried if I hit the trim on his shoulders, for example, because that is going to be metal later. But along these sorts of areas, just a few passes to catch the light. And like I said earlier, we're really painting a gaming figure here, something that's going to be just very quickly popped on and off the table. Does not have to be perfect. Now, after a few passes, you'll be able to build up that edge. It's going to look a little shady in some places, but don't worry, we're really just having fun here. Now, I've also discovered, quite by happy accident, that a great white shark, which this fellow is clearly based on, the inside of their mouth is actually pink. So because I've managed to leave most of the skin tone in there, I'm going to hit the inside of his mouth with some Reikland Flash Shade, and I'm also going to hit all of the orange with the same. Now we're going to do this instead of like an orange shade or an orange contrast, because this is going to darken it down just a little, so it's not quite so crazy bright. And it's a color that you're more likely to have. I do try ordinarily to avoid, oh hey, here's how you can paint this thing if you happen to have these 12 extremely specific paints. Reikland Flash Shade, it's a pretty common one to be using, so yeah, add it to your toolbox if you haven't got it already. And we're just going to shade all over the armor with it. So what you've got there is my favorite way of painting very quick orange armor. It's not going to win you any awards, as we're fond of saying, but the job is done. And it looks pretty cool. If you did want to do any edge highlights from here, then something like Pallid Witch Flesh would be what I'd go to instead of an orange or a yellow. But that's much of a much. I'm not going to bother. What we are going to move on to is his undersuit. And this is a black sort of rubberized thing. For this, I'm going to use German Grey from Vallejo. Now, if you want to stick purely to Citadel products, you could instead here use Corvus Black or Eschen Grey. I am using German Grey because look at the coverage on that. We'll be able to get away with doing this most places in one coat. And because we want to sort of spend as little time as possible doing this, that's going to be ideal. Also, the less time you spend painting an area, the less likely you are to end up going over the orange you've already done. So another good point there. But anyhow, let's go around and all of the undersuit. When you come to this side, like under his arm here, it's actually a little difficult to reach, I will admit. So let's just grab him carefully by the head, and you might want to swap to a smaller brush to do this section. But this will be the easiest way to reach in there and get that spot. Now, I'll be honest, it took a fair bit of maneuvering to get into that space under his chest there. But take your time, you will be able to get to it. We're going to move on now to the metallic details, and for this I'm using Iron Hand Steel. This is quite bright by comparison to some of the other metallics in the range, but we are going to go ahead and shade it in a couple of steps. So rather than having to highlight it, we'll just start with a brighter silver, and then dull it down with our shade. So just pick out the bits you want to be metallic. There isn't really a correct answer to this. These little dealy boppers though, extremely technical term, these little plug things on the sides of his suit, I'm going to paint them as if they are plugs, essentially. I sort of see him getting water pumped into his suit. I don't know. But yeah, let's go around now, Iron Hand Steel, and do some of the metallics. When it comes to the big rims on the shoulder pads, I found I did need to come back and give it a second coat, but for the most part that's nice and quick. And it's really about just picking details that you think are going to look cool in metal. What I'm going to move on to now is the yellow details, and you'll probably see I've actually got white on my brush. I'm using here Off-White from Vallejo, but you can use White Scar or anything of the like. This is very likely going to need 2 coats in most areas, because we are going to need a really solid white for what I've got in mind. I'm going to move on now to Iyanden Yellow. This is a contrast color. And one of the tricky little bits with this is that when you lift your brush out, so if I apply sort of a sweeping motion around, oh, that's going to be a mess. Oh goodness, that's not coming out like I planned at all. Now, that did not turn out anything like what I had in mind. So what I'm going to do, is probably the fact that the white coat was a little bit blotchy. So the contrast is then stuck to that and gone blotchy and lumpy instead of being a smooth color. So we'll do this the old-fashioned way. A coat or two of Arial Yellow will do the job, going over the top of yellow like we are, or in what I had in mind. What I've got now is a little bit of Flayed One flesh, and we're going to paint essentially a highlight for a round surface, which is always a bit of a pain in the neck. What we'll do is I want to paint sort of a crescent shape underneath where the light is coming from. So obviously our light is coming down from the top here, so I'm going to flip this fella upside down, and that'll actually make this a little easier. With a little bit of that lighter yellow underneath, and obviously that's going to change position depending on what angle you're viewing at, is a wee bit of our white. And we're going to go back to this white a couple of times, just to add in 1, 2 little dots, and then our light source going in, 1 dot on the opposite side. Now this is not a perfect method. Obviously, you know, it looks a little cartoony. The top where we want to imply the light is coming into this figure. Now something else you can do with that Flayed One flesh is to paint in. They're near the same color as ours. They're more of a pure white or even a bluey gray. But look at what reality has to say about our shark in a man's suit, and you tell me that his teeth have to be the right color. This is just going to add a little bit of variety in the colors of his face when we paint in boy. I might actually come back and do those in a lighter color in a second, but they're done for now. What I have is Gracia, and I reckon that it's going to be a color on over top. So basically the bottom half of his face, I'm going to give a couple of quick coats of Gracia. It's at this point, I think, that, oh yeah, there's a shark in there, really came to the fore for me. Yeah, I'm having a great time. I have now Mechanicus Standard Grey, and I'm going to use this to paint the top part of his head. I'm going to follow pretty much what biology says about having darker grey top. You, of course, you know, you're painting a made-up fish man. You can do what you would like. Now, I had thought about just giving his whole head a wash of Agrax Earthshade, but I don't think that's going to give me quite the finish I was looking for. So instead what I'm going to do is go straight to a couple of highlights. I'm going to highlight the dark, and let's put a wee bit of this just over his gills. And then on any of the grey, the light grey parts we want to highlight, I'm just going to go back to that off-white. I don't think there's going to be a huge amount to worry about here. Maybe a little on the front of his lip. I did also do in his nostrils with that. That I think is going to be plenty. Now I've got just a tiny wee bit of black. I'm going to use this not just for, I almost forgot to shade the metal. So I've got some Nuln Oil here. And I'm going to apply a layer of this over all of the metalwork. And I'm also going to apply some of this onto the black undersuit, wherever it's convenient to reach. I'm not too worried about that being perfect. Now once that's dried, at last I reckon he's finished. What you could do from here would be to highlight the black. The undersuit, I'd suggest maybe something like Dark Reaper or Thunderhawk Blue for that blue-black finish. You could highlight the silver, and a little bit of Stormhost silver would do the job. There's lots you could do, but I think for a figure that we want to put on the table and just knock around, play some games with, he's going to look cool. Especially given the fact that we're going to be standing sort of looking at him from this angle for most of the time when you're playing the game. And your opponent's going to be looking at him like this. So I think, and I'm going to paint in his base before that. I'm going to do that black. It's finished. And there at last, our Caradon for fun to paint. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I think he might be, aside from the, yeah, I'm pretty happy with. He's a cool figure, and the same is true for the others in the box as well. I think if I was going to paint the whole lot in one go, I'd do a bunch of base coats, then paint the metallics and do some shades as a final step for all of them at once. But yeah, one way or the other. You decide how you want to do them. So Overdrive is now available, and if there is somebody out there who's looking for an arena fighter, a game like that, which is all self-contained, it's not a bad. Thank you very much to Mantic again for sending these along. as well as Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, and all of the lovely patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support really is invaluable. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.